Bro, are you fucking kidding me?
I like this movie. I told you we were going to disagree.
It took your breath away? Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. You can find us at thenerdspodcast.com and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter through our handle at the Nerds Podcast. If you'd like to reach us directly, including sending us suggestions for our nerd favorite segment, you can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. Additionally, we have a YouTube page under the Nerds You're Looking For banner, and each of us have a Letterboxd account, which is basically social media for watching movies. You can find me at that Tyler Hunt, and my co-host Pat can be found at the Nerds Podcast. With all of that being said, and without further ado, alongside me, as always, is my co-host Pat Attack. How's it going, dude?
I'm all right. It's been kind of a shit week. I don't really want to get into it because I don't think it's a very interesting story. But I'm excited that we're recording, as always, and I got to yell at a stranger and got free things, so that's always nice.
Is that part of the story that's not interesting, or is that a story that is interesting?
So that's part of the not interesting story, but it was somewhat interesting. So I'll just kind of briefly get into it. So I've been having car problems recently, and I had something happen earlier in the week where I had to get my car towed from my work. It was a really bad day. Like literally every step of that day, as far as my car was concerned, it went wrong. And it's a real long story. And again, it's not very interesting. So I'll spare our listeners that long rant. But Saturday, I had an appointment to get something completely different, unrelated, looked at, and I've taken my car to this shop every single time for anything that's happened to either my wife and I's car, and they've always been really good to us. But Saturday, for whatever reason, they just dicked me around all day and wouldn't give me like an ETA, and they literally started dodging my phone calls, and I had to call them on my wife's phone, and once she answered, I just fucking laid into her. And I was literally yelling at her. And for those that have known me personally for a while, like I have a bit of a temper, and personally, it's something that I've worked really hard to kind of be a little bit more patient and understanding and not kind of fly off the handle like I did on Saturday. And it was kind of funny because my wife was in the kitchen and she was just like, all of a sudden I just heard you yelling. And I mean, I laid into this lady, and I felt bad because, again, they've always been really good to us. And this lady especially has always been really nice and cool to kind of, I mean, as far as like customer service is concerned. So I kind of felt bad after the fact, but they were being real dicks that day. So they kind of deserved it. And so they gave me most of what they were going to charge me for free because they were like, yeah, we messed this up. We could have handled this better. So yeah, that felt a little bit better. Like I felt a little justified that they realized that they were actually in the wrong and I wasn't just being a psycho. But yeah, it was an interesting day to say the least.
Yeah, it's always a good sign of good customer service when you're dodging the customer's calls.
Yeah. And the sad thing is, it wasn't even that big of a deal. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with my car. And I don't know if that was the reason, like they didn't want to tell me. But at one point when I finally got her back on the phone, she's like, oh, my service manager's on lunch. I was like, you told me he was going to call me back 2 hours ago. Does he take 2-hour lunches? Like, what the fuck, lady?
We'll have to get into the specifics of what place this is off recording because I'm curious.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was definitely an interesting day to say the least. And then they couldn't even fix my car. At the end of it, they couldn't even fix it. So I have to take it to a different place. So the adventure will continue later this week. So I'm not looking forward to that because I got to take it to a place I've never been to before. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's been kind of a shit week.
Yeah, that's not a cool adventure. Like,
no, not at all.
It's not like Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider. It's like middle-age adventures with Pat Coon.
Yeah, it's adulting at its finest. If you're not yelling at people on the phone, that you're not adulting correctly.
Yeah, for sure, man. So you ready to dive into this episode?
Yeah, so if this is your first episode, we break up the episodes into different segments. The first segment is just kind of us checking in with each other. We call it What We're Into. So normally what we do with this segment is I bring up something and Tyler brings up something and we kind of just discuss it. Well, this particular episode, we were kind of into the same thing. There was 2 movies that came out this week that we wanted to talk about. One we're going to give a full review later in the episode for our main topic. But the other one, Happy Death Day to You, which will be the last time I give the full title because that title is real fucking stupid, is what we're both going to be into. So we're going to kind of give like a miniature review for what we're into. So we're just going to double up. So if you're not aware, Happy Death Day 2 is what I'm going to be calling it because that's what it should have been called. It was written and directed by a guy named Christopher Landon, who did a lot of the Paranormal Activity films. He also directed the first film, but I don't believe he wrote it, but he definitely wrote this one. And just kind of a quick synopsis. The reason behind Tree's curse of living the same day over and over again is revealed, while it also traps her friends in the same loop this time around. And I have to be completely honest, even though I did give this a favorable review, I think it was what I was into when the first movie came out. I really didn't think much of the trailer, and I didn't think much going into the first film because I kind of just thought it looked like a stupid version of Groundhog's Day, but I was pleasantly surprised, and it's really fun and really smart, and it was a lot better than it probably deserved to be, or the trailer kind of led me to believe it was going to be. And I actually rewatched the first film the other day while I was editing last week's episode, and it still really holds up. It's definitely one of those movies that has a lot, I don't want to say Easter eggs because it's the first film of a franchise, but it does have a little cute things here and there that if you've seen the film, you don't necessarily have to pay that much attention to the plot, so you can kind of pick up on stuff like that. And those kind of films are really fun for me. So it really holds up, and I was pretty excited going into this film.
Yeah, the only reason I ever watched the first Happy Death Day was because of you talking favorably of it on the podcast, and I really like that movie a lot. I think I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. I rewatched it in Shocktober and liked it just like you did on your rewatch recently. And for me, I think that was one of the movies that really solidified Blumhouse, because the movie didn't look good and then it ended up being really good, and it kind of, made it appear as though Blumhouse can take even the shittiest of premises and make a good, decent movie out of it. So, I was excited, I guess, for Happy Death Day to You, but I did have my reservations as well. I didn't know a lot about it going into it, and I'm kind of eager to get into this review, because I'm kind of curious of what you thought of it.
Yeah, so like I said, I was excited, but I definitely did have reservations as well going into this movie. For me, especially with a movie that has such a weird concept as the first one, too much of something doesn't always turn out to be a good thing. And I would say, I want to say it was like 20 or 30 minutes into this movie. It may not even have been that long. Once this movie really started to get going, they literally have a conversation about my greatest fear going into this movie, which is the first film works. One of the reasons it works so well is it doesn't spend pretty much any time on the how or the why. It's about Tree, the main character, the woman that you see in the trailers. It's about her emotional story, about her becoming a better person, because she's basically a terrible person at the very beginning of the first film. And there's reasons why she is the way that she is, but she's not a very good person at the beginning of that film. And the first film is not necessarily about why it's happening to her, but just that journey of her becoming a better person and her reflecting on herself. And this film, the sequel, takes way too much time explaining the how and the why it happens. And they literally talk about how that kind of cheapens the experience of the first film. And just because you acknowledge something doesn't necessarily mean that it goes away. And I couldn't help but think that throughout this whole movie, is that it kind of cheapens that first film for me. And I haven't watched, or I haven't rewatched it since I saw the second one, but I don't know if I would necessarily like it as much. The thing that did get me excited, among other things, for this movie was the addition of her friends. I thought that it was kind of cool that, at least judging by the trailer, that it looked like it was going to be not just her story, but also their story as well. And unfortunately, it didn't necessarily do that. The film didn't. It was still Tree's story, which is important because that's the person that we're going to be most connected with. But it was a little, I would say, derivative of the first film, just because, I mean, it's literally her reliving that day over and over again, the same day that we see in the first film, and they don't change a ton about it. I mean, the premise is a little bit different as far as what she's doing again and again during that day, but it definitely felt very repetitive from the first film.
Yeah, I think that you and I are going to linger on the same points quite a bit. So, I mean, like you said, this movie answers the questions that nobody ever asked about the first movie.
Absolutely.
I found myself shaking my head a lot and wondering why they decided to go this direction with it and basically turn what was a horror comedy situation into a sci-fi comedy in a way. So sometimes an explanation isn't needed, and this is one of those times. I do think that there was a charm factor that this movie retained, and it was by no means a boring watch, but I just was not a fan of the direction they decided to go with this. They like I said, take it from a horror movie with comedic elements and make it this convoluted sci-fi thing where you're talking about dimensions and potentially time travel, and there's a MacGuffin and just all of these things that I don't really I wasn't expecting, and I wish I would have, so I could have braced myself before I saw this movie. So again, nobody leaves Happy Death Day or Groundhog's Day that you compared it to earlier and asks for an explanation as to why the character is going through what he or she is going through. I mean, you assume that it's a storytelling device to have character development and make the character better at the end of the movie, which is what both of those movies do. But this movie decides to answer that question, which is just kind of silly to me. So, they go through this whole Back to the Future thing in this movie where they're trying to get back to the right dimension, and it just seems, the first movie was derivative, but this movie seems like it was just grasping for straws. The more I talk about it, the more I'm kind of convincing myself that it's a pretty fucking dumb movie. But I don't know that it's a deal breaker. I think that if you enjoyed Happy Death Day, I wouldn't say don't go see this, because the movie is pretty funny in some parts, and I think that there is that charm that's still there, and I would say that a lot of that can be accredited to Jessica Roth, who plays Tree. I think that she's great in this movie, but either way, I mean, at least it wasn't boring. It was just a really weird direction to go in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I will point out that I still had fun watching this movie because it still definitely has a lot of the same dark humor as the first one. So that definitely works. And that kind of goes back to Tree's performance. Jessica Roth, I believe is how you pronounce her name. So she was fantastic. And I was actually thinking, as I was watching this movie, why we don't see her in more stuff, because she was great in the first one. She's great in this one. And she makes what could have been a really shitty movie a watchable movie for me, because she's so great in it, and the comedy works because her performance really works. A little bit over the top at times, but it kind of works in this goofy movie. And with the first one, it did kind of feel like a horror movie because you have this killer killing her over and over again. They do it in a fun and interesting way, as fun as they could make someone getting killed over and over again. And this one, because of what happens, you don't really have that. It's not a horror movie at all. Like, the first one's really not that much of a horror movie to begin with, but they took that away. And in the second one, it's not a horror movie at all. And I definitely agree with you. It's definitely more of a sci-fi movie. And I'd say it's definitely more of a comedy with maybe sci-fi and a little bit of horror wrapping around it. But where the first one was definitely a slasher movie with comedy elements, it kind of reversed in the second one, which was a little bit disappointing.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree with that. It didn't feel like it was part of the same franchise, except for that you obviously have the connection with the characters. But besides that, it felt like a totally different movie. And I respect, I guess, that they tried to go a different route with it instead of making just a carbon copy of the first movie, but they just added too much to the lore. There's that mid-credit scene. I don't know if you stayed for that or not. That kind of,
yeah, we did,
potentially sets up another sequel that seems totally unnecessary. It's just a little too self-aware at this point for me, and that's disappointing because, like you said, that first one was kind of like a diamond in the rough.
Yeah, 100%. This wasn't a bad film. It just too derivative of the first one, and it kind of lost a little bit of the charm of that first one. So, star rating, would you give Happy Death Day 2?
So, I said that I'd give the first one a 3.5. I think for now, I'm going to play nice, and I'm going to give this one a 3, because if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, I really love Happy Death Day, I wouldn't tell them not to watch this, because you get a few of the same beats that you get in that movie. So I'd recommend it in that situation. But I could see me watching this movie again and giving it a 2.5 for sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same way. I'm going to give it 3 as well. Now, this is a conversation that we've had before, and I just kind of thought it would be fun to kind of bring it up every once in a while. Is this something, it doesn't sound like it, I think I can answer the question, but is this something that you will own? And if so, would you own it digitally, Blu-ray, 4K? What would you think with Happy Death Day 2?
So a lot of times whenever I'm deciding to buy a Blu-ray now, and I think I might have mentioned this when we talked about Lego Movie 2, I will buy a physical copy of it if I own the first movie, just because, I don't know, just for completionist sake, I guess I would want to own it. And I do own a physical copy of Happy Death Day. That being said,
so do I.
Yeah, that being said, I don't think I'd buy it on Blu-ray. I think I'd buy it digitally, maybe if it was pretty cheap, but I don't see it being something that I'll own in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I would definitely, if I'm going to ever own this, it would definitely be digitally. I don't know if it would be worth the Blu-ray purchase anymore. I mean, usually they're about the same, so it's not like I'm saving that much money, but it's more of like the physical media is taking up a slot on my DVD player, or not my DVD player, my Blu-ray collection or shelf, whatever. So yeah, I think I would probably go digitally, and if I did that, it would depend on if there was going to be a third one. Because if there's not a third one, I may just decide I don't know if I would necessarily watch this movie again, but if there's going to be a third one, which this movie seems like it's tracking to do pretty well, so I would guess that they're probably going to try to do a third one. I would probably want to watch both of them before I saw the third one, so maybe in that case I would probably just buy it digitally right before the third one came out.
Awesome, man.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two, and we always kind of talk about how we try to text each other to see if we're going to read the same thing, so hopefully we don't talk about the same thing. I would literally sell you my house for like $1 if we're going to read the same thing. Like, I would literally bet my entire house that we don't talk about the same thing this episode, so I didn't bother texting you.
Yeah, that's a pretty good bet, because I'm talking about something. I think the most recent issue came out a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure that I'm not sure you're reading it, but you may be buying it, but I don't think you'd be caught up on it. So I'm going to talk about The Batman Who Laughs, numbers 2 and 3.
Okay, I am buying this, but I haven't read any of it, so Chrissy and I are not homeless.
So I did talk about issue 1 when it came out, and I thought I would check back in with this 6-issue miniseries now that it's over, now that it's half over, since issue 3 just recently came out. So again, this is written by Scott Snyder and drawn by the artist Jock. And I feel like I have to say this anytime I talk about a Scott Snyder book, but you and I have gone on record multiple times about what a fan we are of his stuff for the most part. I think the only actual comic book review or retrospective that we've ever done as a main topic on this podcast was after the finale of Snyder and Capullo's main run on Batman. And that is the stuff, again, I've told the story before on the podcast, that got me back into comics. So with all of that being said, something is starting to kind of click with me about his writing, and it's probably a testament to why I love his stuff, and that's the fact that he is completely relentless in his storytelling. So there were a few stories that he told in the main Batman line that created anxiety, especially during the Court of Owls, where Batman is slowly going crazy in this underground maze. And this Batman Who Laughs miniseries is basically doing that again. In fact, it may be even more anxiety provoking than anything else I've read by Snyder. He has this way of pushing Batman to this brink of desperation and does everything in his power to make it seem like it's impossible for Batman to win, which can really take a toll if each issue the character is just being beat worse and worse. And that's kind of where issue 3 of this miniseries ends, with Batman in a position where I have no idea how he's going to come back. And there's still 3 issues left where they're going to finish this out. So I kind of have a love-hate thing going on with this entire run right now. I talked about the relentlessness of his storytelling, paying off typically in the long run and being satisfying, but the journey to that point is so draining that sometimes it just slightly feels like a chore to read this. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to stick with this miniseries and I'll read anything Batman related that Scott Snyder ever writes, but it's definitely one of those comics that evokes the most emotion and anxiety for me, which is a good and a bad thing, because like I said, he's just pushing this character further and further every time he does a miniseries or a story with Batman. And it's starting to not feel like he's the world's greatest detective and he's the world's greatest punching bag. But I again respect Snyder, and I think that the art's really great, even though the artist Jock is kind of pretentious and goes by one name. Like, it's really good stuff. So I know you're picking this book up. If any of our listeners out there that read comics aren't picking this book up, I definitely would recommend it, but just buckle in because it is an anxiety-ridden ride for sure.
So you brought up a really interesting point, and it's a topic we've touched on a few times with different movies and TV and what have you, but I'm just interested to see your opinion on this. Do you think that you would still read this book if it was anybody else? I mean, given the issues that you've read so far, if it was anybody else, let's say it was somebody that you didn't know going into it, would you still read it? Or if you're just giving him the benefit of the doubt?
No, I'd still read it. I know that I kind of left that with like a negative undertone when I finished up with it. And that was purposeful because, I read issues 2 and 3 this morning and was just like, Jesus Christ, like they're just beating this character to death. But I know that by issue 6, Batman's going to pull himself out of it and find a way to win. It's just the journey is not as fun as maybe like Tom King's run on Batman. So that's a long way of saying, like, yes, I'd still read it. I still think it's a well-written comic, but, I prefer the main Batman run by Tom King right now.
All right, cool.
So what'd you read?
I am, I read this first volume, probably not going to read any of the other volumes, but we are going to review the film adaptation of Alita, Battle Angel, and I read the first volume. So I think it's 9 volumes is the whole graphic novel, which is also known as Gunm, in Japan, which I'm not sure if I pronounce that right. It's
is it the word gum with 3 M's? Because that's how
it's I was about to spell it, you dick.
Okay.
It's GUNNM.
Okay.
So yeah, that's I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but that's how it's known in Japan. So like I said, we're going to be reviewing the film adaptation later in the episode as our main topic, and I'm going to get into the story of the film adaptation, but I was intrigued enough by that story to check this out, just to kind of see, compare and contrast how I felt about the story about the movie and how I felt about the story with the graphic novel. So like I said, I think there's 9 volumes. I didn't bother buying all of them. I think I would have done that in the past, like gotten really excited about something, bought all of them. Like I'm definitely going to read all of them, but I've been trying to be a little bit, I don't want to say cheaper, but I would say like safer. And I just bought the first one. I was like, okay, I'm just going to give it a shot. It's 230 pages or whatever on Comixology. So I figured I would just buy the first one, give it a shot. It was written and the art was done by, I'm assuming it's a guy, and this is literally the bravest thing that I've ever done. I'm going to give his name a shot. So, I'm going to start over. That was awful. Yokito Kirosho? No, not close, but I gave it a shot. That was literally the bravest thing I've ever done because I've lived a very soft life. But he, like I said, he also did the art as well, and I'll get into how I felt about the art here in a second. So this volume consists of 6 issues, or they actually break it down as fights. That's what they call them. I'm not sure why, if that's a manga thing or if that's just an Alita Battle Angel thing. It was very weird because I've never read a manga before, and you literally have to read it right to left, which was interesting for me. Literally on Comixology, you have to swipe right to left, and you also have to read right to left. I think I knew that going in, but I didn't remember it. And so the Comixology was like, hey, dummy, you're going the wrong way. It literally popped up. It didn't call me a dummy, but it was like, on this book, you have to actually swipe a certain way. And they were explaining how to read this thing, which was kind of interesting and very silly. But pretty much this book starts off very, very similar to the movie, how that started off, but it diverts pretty quickly. It gets very weird very quickly, and I get why they made certain artistic liberties in the movie to kind of make the story a little bit simpler. I did like some of the stuff that the book did versus what the movie did, and we'll get into that here in a little bit when we review the movie, but it does get kind of cheesy. I don't know if that's how all mangas are, but I mean, this is literally my first experience, hence the reason I didn't know how to read it. But it was super cheesy at times. And I don't know if that's his writing, because I'm not going to try to butcher his name again, or her name, I'm not sure. But it was pretty cheesy at points, and it was hard to read at times, because it was one of those things where I would have just liked the writer to let us infer that this was happening, but a lot of times Alita or somebody would just say it, and I was like, oh, that was a really like cringeworthy line that I didn't necessarily need to read. There were certain things in the movie, and for me, reading this right after I saw the movie, I literally bought it the night that I watched this movie, and I couldn't help but compare and contrast a lot while I was reading it, and there's no connection to the body like there is in the film. So that was a little bit disappointing, because I did kind of like that. I did like Alita's backstory a little bit in the movie. It does kind of get weird in the movie, and again, we'll get to that here in a little bit. But I don't know if that's something that they're gonna get to, or they do get to later in a different volume. But as far as I've read in volume 1, there's no connection to her past with this body. It just so happens she gets trashed, her body gets trashed, and so he just happens to have this other body that's this berserker body, and he's just like, oh, you're ready to use this body. And so he just hooks up to it. The artwork is, It's different. I would definitely say that because, I mean, it's definitely has more of an anime style to it, which I'm not a huge fan of anime. So that was a little, I wouldn't say it wasn't surprising because I assumed that that was going to be the case. The one thing that was kind of confusing to me with the artwork, and again, I'm completely ignorant when it comes to these kind of graphic novels, but like some of the book was colored, but some of it wasn't. Like when it was colored, it felt like they did it in like a watercolor style, which was interesting. But most of the book, I would say probably 90% of the book was in black and white. So I don't know if there was a reason why they did certain pages every once in a while in color. I thought maybe it was a character's perspective, but that wasn't the case. Like that was my first thought. And then I kind of looked back on some of the other pages that were in color and that wasn't the case. So I'm not sure exactly what they were trying to do, but at least from my perspective, if they were trying to convey something with that style, it didn't at least hit with me. So, yeah, it was kind of weird. I know a lot of times with comics and movies and stuff like that, if it's black and white, that's for budgetary reasons. And I'm sure that's part of the case, but it was very weird why they chose to do a couple of pages here and there in color. Some of the action scenes obviously worked really well in the movie, and that's one of my favorite parts of the movie, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But the action in this comic felt very weird. I mean, action in comic books are kind of hard to do, but especially in this book, it felt like I was watching a Transformers movie. Like there was really hard cuts and it was really hard to decipher what was happening. So all in all, I think it's interesting. It's very fun for me to read something like this, having seen the movie already and being able to see the differences, but it was not worth me reading the rest of the volume. So yeah, it was interesting, and if you really, really liked the movie, I would definitely suggest it. Maybe you'd like this a little bit better than me. I'm saying the royal you, Tyler. I don't think that, my guess is you're never going to read this. So I was kind of using the royal you there for any listeners out there that really liked Alita Battle Angel. Maybe you check out the graphic novel, but it wasn't good enough for me to read the rest of it.
So you may have said this, and I might have missed it, but did you decide to read this before you saw the movie or after you saw the movie?
I was intrigued by the story after seeing the movie, at least enough that I decided to read it after I saw the movie.
Yeah, we're not going to agree on this review.
Yeah, I don't think we are. Like, this is one where I think I'm going to be, well, spoiler alert, I guess, for our review, but I'm going to be, it sounds like a lot more positive than you.
Yeah, let's just put it this way. When I got out of the movie, I didn't rush out and buy the fucking volume of manga that influenced it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to be a lot different then, which excites me because we don't disagree a lot. So this will be a little change of pace.
Perfect. So we do have one segment that stands between us and that review, though, and that's Nerd News. So I have a few stories this week. Nothing too crazy, but I do know, Pat, that you wanted to talk about some Nintendo stuff, so we'll get to that as well. But I couldn't, in good conscience, do Nerd News this week without bringing up the piece of nerd news that was probably the most memed thing of the week, which was the first look at Will Smith as the Blue Genie in the Aladdin trailer that came out during the Grammys last week. So I don't know, Pat, if you watched the trailer itself or if you just saw the screen grab of Will Smith in blue, but the trailer itself wasn't bad. Like it looked pretty impressive. It looked like a great mix of live action and kind of the familiar things that we know from the animated Aladdin movie. But then it ends with the big reveal of the Blue Genie and all his CGI glory. And man, it's not easy on the eyes, man. As I know that you agree with some of the memes you posted, but woof, that is a choice they went with. So not for me.
Yeah, it was weird because I'm not a huge fan of the Grammys. I'm 31 years old. I've literally heard of maybe 20% of the people that get nominated for the Grammys, but my wife's a big fan, so she was watching it, and I was kind of like doing other things. And I just so happened to be in the room when the trailer premiered, and so I was like, oh, sweet, the new live-action Aladdin trailer, and then I almost threw up in my mouth when I saw that. It looked like, and I don't mean for this to be a thing on the podcast, but it literally looked like a deep fake. Like, they literally had a blue body and they just like superimposed his face on it. It was really bad. So everybody freaked out when the Entertainment Weekly cover was released and he was on it and he looked ridiculous. He looked like Sinbad and he wasn't blue, and everybody freaked out. And of course he came out and said that he's blue in most of the movie. And I feel like Disney released this trailer thinking, okay, like they can't freak out about anything in this trailer. Like, he's blue, so nobody's going to freak out about that. But they never thought to check to see if it actually looked good. It looks like 1995 CGI. It looks so fucking bad.
Yeah, I mean, my mind didn't immediately go to the CGI looking bad. I think that it was just super fucking creepy the way that Will Smith looks. Like, I don't know. I'm curious to see how they pull it off. I think, the rest of this movie, everything about this movie could be perfect, and the genie could be the one thing that's fucked up, and it will break this movie for sure. And I think, part of it's going to be that Robin Williams holds a certain place in people's hearts with his portrayal of the character. I know he does in mine, but, yeah, man, it's not looking good, which is not great because I have that film on my Rotten Tomatoes film draft. So,
yeah, I just think that they are not starting in a good place. And like we kind of talked about a little bit with the Ghostbusters reboot a few years ago, we liked that more than a lot of people liked it, and we definitely liked the trailer, that first trailer, a lot more than people liked it. I think people are going to hate this movie just because it's going to be trendy to hate it. And I hate it right now so far. I think it's silly that they redid it to begin with. I was curious to see what Guy Ritchie could do because he definitely has a very unique and cool style as a director. So I was interested to see how that translated, but they are not starting off well. And I think people are going to hate this just to hate it.
Yeah, man, we'll see. It's going to be rough. I heard an interesting theory. So this isn't part of nerd news. I didn't watch the trailer, but the theory is that Disney released the trailer for Frozen 2 this week, a month ahead of when they wanted to, because they wanted to kind of cleanse everyone's palate of the Aladdin trailer and the backlash that trailer was causing. So they released it early. I'm assuming that Frozen 2 was probably going to be released with Dumbo.
Yeah, that would be my guess. It wouldn't surprise me if they did that. Frozen 2 just isn't on my radar at all, and I didn't even watch the trailer because, I mean, it's an animated movie. I love animated movies, but for whatever reason, that movie just didn't connect with me, and I feel like I'm kind of in the minority there because I know a lot of people love that movie. But I feel sorry for all the parents that finally got their kids to stop singing that fucking song, and now the Frozen 2 trailer has been released, so they're going to start singing that fucking song again. But I don't have any kids, so I don't have to worry about that just yet.
Yeah, I didn't watch it either, but I'm sure I'll see the movie when it comes out. So, next story is around the Loki show that's going to be on Disney Plus. So they hired a showrunner for the show, and there's like a little blurb about when it's going to take place. So Michael Waldron is going to be the showrunner, and he's also going to write the first episode of the Loki show. And he probably doesn't sound familiar, but apparently he was a writer on the upcoming season of Rick and Morty. So, I mean, that could be a hint of the type of feel they're going for in this show. And then allegedly the show is going to follow Loki as the trickster and shapeshifter that pops up throughout human history as an unlikely influencer of historical events. So it's not necessarily going to take place after Infinity War, so it's not like they're bringing him back from the dead. Spoilers. But this sounds interesting to me, but also not what I was expecting. It almost sounds like Drunk History with Loki.
Yeah, so I first heard this and I was like, that sounds pretty fucking stupid. Like, that was my initial, like, just knee-jerk reaction was, that sounds, first of all, it sounds cheap because, like what you said with Infinity War, like, people were very curious, like, oh, is it going to happen after that? Like, are they going to bring him back? Because he's been brought back a few times in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This just feels cheap that they're just like, oh, well, he's just going to pop up throughout history. But because it's Marvel, and other than the two Thor movies, to varying degrees, they haven't really made a bad property. So, I mean, well, I guess I'll throw an Iron Fist in that as well if you're going to include the TV shows as well, since this is a TV show.
Well, so Iron Fist, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., The Inhumans.
Did you watch either Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Inhumans?
I watched part of the first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., was not a fan, and I saw enough of the Inhumans.
But it wasn't bad.
I saw enough out of the Inhumans to make a call there.
No, I saw the trailer, and that was enough for me to make a call. But I literally, like, blocked that out of my head. So I'm glad that you brought it up, but don't interrupt me again. Anyways, I completely forgot what I was saying. Oh, they deserve the benefit of the doubt as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to roll with it, even though I am very curious if they can pull off that concept.
Yeah, I think it'd be good. I think it'd be funny if they go the humor route, which I think you have to do. So I'm looking forward to it. And let's see, the last story I have before I turn it over to you for some Nintendo stuff is around Bumblebee. And I thought that I'd bring this up just because, again, there weren't a lot of stories this week, but also it kind of seems pretty cheap. But I guess yesterday at the New York City Toy Fair, Hasbro, or I think it's Hasbro. Is it Hasbro or Mattel? Whoever does Transformers.
It's Hasbro.
Yeah. So Hasbro made the announcement that Bumblebee, the movie that came out in December, was basically a relaunch of the Transformers movie universe and kind of a reboot, which, again, seems pretty cheap because if you watch that movie, which it doesn't sound like you're going to, but again, I saw that movie in theaters. It is not a reboot. It is 100% canon to the most recent films that we've seen out of the Transformers universe. Like, it's the same character design, same voice actors for characters like Optimus Prime, same storyline. It's just, it takes place in the 80s, so it's like a 20-year prequel, right? So I think it's pretty cheap that they found success with that movie and they're going to say, oh, actually it was a reboot and we're going to follow this film universe now, because that's not how the movie presents itself. But that being said, Transformers is a hot dumpster fire anyways of a franchise, so it doesn't surprise me that they do a move like this.
Oh, 100%. And you said it perfectly when you said it was just kind of a cheap move. I didn't see the movie. I don't particularly plan on seeing the movie. Even if they're going to reboot it, I probably won't plan on seeing the other movies either. But I believe you when you say that it doesn't present itself or it doesn't frame itself as a reboot in that movie. So if it feels definitely cheap, where they were just like, oh, it found success. People are curious why Sam or whatever isn't mentioned in this movie, which is something that we talked about when you discussed it. We talked about it when the trailer was released. Like, how do they go back and explain these two Bumblebee's relationship with this girl and not bring up Sam? And that was something that we talked about when you saw it and talked about. I think you brought it up for what you were into one episode, and it was just, oh, well, this movie was critically successful, and it was obviously, as far as the box office is concerned, it was critically and financially successful. So let's just go ahead and say it was a reboot and just kind of pick up from there.
Yeah, man. Definitely cheap and, I guess, unexpected at the same time. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Nintendo Direct.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, Nintendo kind of has these smaller E3 type of announcements. It's kind of like the Mortal Kombat 11 reveal type of size as far as the announcement's concerned. They usually have about 2 or 3 a year. And of course, they also have their E3 presentation, and they call them Nintendo Directs. And they're normally not as big as the one that we got this past Wednesday, but for me, it hit on a lot of things that I wanted to see from Nintendo. So there was a lot of Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy stuff, which I'm not a fan of either one of those franchises, so I didn't particularly care about it. But normally, what Nintendo does with these directs is there's usually a game or two that it kind of revolves around, and in this particular case, it was Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy. So, again, I wanted to bring them up, but I don't particularly have much to say because I didn't play either one of those franchises, other than Fire Emblem has some fighters on Super Smash Brothers, but that's pretty much the only way that I am aware of that franchise. However, there are a few more games getting ported over to the Switch, 2 of which I've played, and one of them is an upcoming game. So, Hellblade, I've talked about that on a past episode. I really enjoyed that game, and I think that it's a really cool game to bring to the Switch, and it's a very short game, so if you only have a Nintendo Switch and you've been waiting to play that game, I definitely suggest when it comes out, go ahead and pick that up because it's a shorter game, but it's definitely worth it. Dead by Daylight, which is kind of Friday the 13th, like horror slasher multiplayer game, which is pretty fun. I haven't played much of it, but it's pretty fun. I finally bought it a few weeks ago. I think it was about the same time that I got Resident Evil 2 Remake. So I've been basically playing a lot of horror games recently. And then the upcoming Mortal Kombat 11 will be coming to the Switch as well, which obviously that's not a port. It's just going to be coming out when it comes out for the other consoles. They just hadn't released that it was coming out for the Switch prior to this Nintendo Direct. And then the biggest surprise, well, I don't want to say it's the biggest surprise, but just kind of the biggest what the fuck thing that they announced was the fact that there's going to be a Battle Royale Tetris game. You heard me right, a Battle Royale Tetris game. You know, Tetris, the game where the falling blocks and you have to, like, rearrange them to fit into the little square. Yeah, that game is getting a Battle Royale game called Tetris 99. It was announced, and it was one of those, I don't know, there's a shadow release or something. There's a term for it, but basically as soon as they announced it, it was available to download. I have not checked it out. I've heard good things. I've heard that it's fun. I do like playing Tetris, so maybe I will eventually check it out. But the Battle Royale genre has gotten pretty fucking ridiculous if Tetris gets a Battle Royale game. And then I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I saw this funny tweet that said, am I able to play Tetris 99 if I haven't played the other 98? That I thought was
yeah, that's
funny.
pretty fun. Yeah. So the other one of the other big things that I'm not super familiar with this particular game, but I have seen some YouTubers, most notably our good friend Sigmund Gaming, do a lot of videos for Mario Maker, and they announced that they are going to be making another Mario Maker game, which I thought was kind of weird. I figured they would just port the original over to the Switch, but apparently the original was made for the Wii U gamepad, so it kind of just makes sense to add a few things and kind of make it work better for the Switch and then just call it Mario Maker 2. So that's what they're doing. So I'm definitely excited about that because that seems like a really fun game. Again, I haven't played it myself, but people have a lot of fun with that. So it's definitely something that I will probably get into when it comes out. And then the big one, the big release, and the reason I wanted to talk about this Direct so much on this podcast is the fact that they announced Zelda Link's Awakening, which I can't fucking wait for. It's a reboot of, well, not really a reboot. It was just a remake of the I think it was the 3rd or 4th game in the Zelda franchise. So it came out for Game Boy. I only had a few Game Boy games growing up, and this was not one of them. So I'm super, super excited for it. Anytime I get to play another Zelda game, I'm going to be excited for it. So it's definitely a good news situation for me. I know a lot of people are complaining about the art design for it, but I think it looks pretty cool. I like the fact that they didn't just make it like the old Game Boy game, that they took the mechanics and the story for that game and very similar. I don't think it's as a big deal as the Resident Evil 2 remake. Like, I don't think they're just like stripping it down to its foundation and building it back up like they did with that game. But it does feel like they're doing more of that than just like a straight remaster. So I'm definitely excited for that. And like I said, anytime I get to play another Zelda game that I didn't get to play previous, I'm definitely excited for.
Yeah, man, that's cool. I mean, I don't really have a lot to add. I'm not interested in any of those games, at least for the Switch. So that's all for nerd news.
You're telling me that you're not excited for Tetris 99. I find that hard to believe.
If I was excited for it, I'd go buy a fucking Switch and play it today, I guess.
I think you could play it on your phone.
Really?
I'm not sure if that's 100% right, but I want to say that you can play it on your phone. But I'm probably wrong.
Interesting.
All right, so on to our main topic, which I've talked a lot about. I've teased a lot throughout this episode. We are going to be reviewing the film adaptation of Alita Battle Angel, which was directed by Robert Rodriguez and written by James Cameron, and it's based on the manga that I discussed earlier and pronounced probably incorrectly earlier. So Alita Battle Angel is about in the distant future, Ido, a cyborg doctor, finds the remains of a cyborg made of tech that was believed to be lost to the world. And I don't want to say I'm a pretty big fan of Robert Rodriguez's work, but I am a fan, and to lesser extent, James Cameron. He has made a lot of things that I grew up on, but most recently, especially with the Avatar film, I've kind of soured on some of his storytelling techniques. It's become some of the stuff that he does in his movies is very cliche. So I was interested to see what that combo could come up with. And live action adaptations of these mangas have been definitely hit or miss. And the trailer makes the visuals look really cool. And so I was interested in seeing this, but I wasn't super excited for it by any means. I will say that I was rooting for this movie to do well because I kind of cheated. If you remember back to our Rotten Tomatoes film draft, I'd heard some positive things coming out of Twitter, which you can't always trust, but they were saying a lot of positive things about the early screenings of this film. So I picked it a little bit earlier than I probably needed to or would have otherwise. So I kind of cheated in that aspect, but I don't think it's doing super well on Rotten Tomatoes. Last time I checked, it was kind of hovering around like 58 to like 60%, which is not bad because it was still kind of a later pick for me. But I was a little excited for this movie and I was definitely rooting for it as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you admit to that. That way that if you end up winning this year, I can make a big deal about how there has to be an asterisk by it. So thank you for that ammunition. But I was not excited for this movie. This movie was not on my radar. And whenever it was even part of the films that you initially put together for the Rotten Tomato film draft before we edited it a little bit, I was surprised to even see that you wanted it to be one of the movies because that's how little I thought of it. That being said, I mean, I would consider, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have told you I was a huge Robert Rodriguez fan, and things have changed since then with his filmography, but I still consider myself a fan. So I held out hope a little bit for this movie, but again, it just kind of, with the promotional material blended, I don't know, it just kind of fell to the background a little bit. Like it almost reminded me of the same type of stuff we saw from Mortal Engines. It just didn't look like my cup of tea.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And to give you even more ammunition, one of the reasons I fought for this movie to be in our film draft was because I was like, this is kind of my secret weapon. I know that this thing is happening. And there's been some positive reviews out there, or at least Twitter reactions out there. And I was like, man, when we wanted to cut something out, I was like, I really want to keep this movie in because I'm an asshole and a cheater.
For sure.
All right, man. So broad strokes wise, how'd you feel about Alita?
So a few reviews ago, I guess it's been 2 weeks at this point, when we gushed about Resident Evil 2, I mentioned that most of the reviews we do this time of year were for things that I ultimately end up feeling indifferent about. and that game was a breath of fresh air. Well, I'm happy to say that despite our best intentions, this movie pretty much checks the box for something that I feel completely neutral about. So I didn't love this movie. I didn't hate this movie. I will never watch it ever again. And just because something has great visuals doesn't mean it can replace an interesting and impactful story. So, I kind of alluded to not liking it whenever we finished up our comic segment and kind of talked about you reading the first volume of the manga. I'm not going to come into this review with guns blazing about how much I despised it, but I definitely didn't fucking think that it was any good. So yeah, we'll kind of see where my score lands, but I can't imagine it's going to be above a 3.
So summer movie season for me, it seems like, even though I always kind of a dick when we used to do like our top 5 like summer movies that we're anticipating or whatever we called those episodes, I was always a dick and be like, oh, you have to pick movies that are released during the summer. But it seems like the summer movie season, or at least what most people describe as a summer movie season, seems to start earlier and earlier every year. Literally, Captain Marvel is like a couple of weeks away. It gets released in early March. I've had my tickets for a while now. That being said, February is still too early for me to call this film a summer movie. But the reason that I bring that up is because I think a lot of people, when they hear the word summer movie, they assume that it's like a popcorn movie. And as far as I'm concerned, like when you call something a popcorn movie, it's because it's empty calories, just like eating popcorn. Like it doesn't really fill you up, and it's more just empty calories. And what I mean by that is visually stunning, but then the story's lacking. And the perfect example that always comes to my mind when I think of a summer movie or a popcorn movie is Jurassic World from a few years ago. It's really cool to watch, but the story, if you think too much about it, it's really stupid, and it just kind of crumbles upon itself. So I think that you can say, and I wouldn't disagree if you said that Alita Battle Angel, you could say some of that about this movie, as far as it being, the story being lacking. It's definitely not what the manga is, at least me reading the first volume. They definitely made some artistic liberties with that, but the visuals are so stunning. And I know it's cliche to say, and it's very, it sounds like hyperbole, but literally I gasped while I was watching a certain scene in this movie. This movie literally took my breath away at a couple of points. So I think that even though the story could have used some work, and I'll get into why I think it could have used some work here in our next segment, but the visuals just made for a really fun movie to watch.
Bro, are you fucking kidding me?
I like this movie. I told you we were going to disagree.
It took your breath away?
Yeah, are you telling me the motorball scene wasn't just as cool as Incredibles 2 when she's on the motorbike? It's the same fucking scene, man. It's just as cool.
No fucking way, man. No.
I would put that scene up with Incredibles 2 any day of the week.
All right. But even Incredibles 2 didn't take my breath away. It's not a fucking Celine Dion song.
I said I gasped. I even admitted that it was cliche to say, but I mean, I literally gasped during that scene.
Awesome, man.
You're never going to let me live that down, are you?
No, I mean, I don't want to shit on you for something you like, but I just feel like that was a little over dramatic. Like, it didn't take your fucking breath away.
It literally did. I don't know if you know what a gasp is, but that's what a gasp is, Tyler.
Okay. Okay.
So whoever said that they like when we argue, it sounds like we're going to argue a lot.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know, man.
All right. So
I thought we'd argue about the movie, not what taking breath away means and defined as. But story. So let's talk about the story.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously this is the part of the movie where I'm the most indifferent. It's not that it's bad, but again, it's not great. It's not like the characters, I can't sit here and talk about, oh, these characters made bad or dumb choices, or that the story beats don't make a lot of sense. It was just really dull for the most part, which makes it difficult to talk about. I appreciate that this is based on a popular manga story and that it may be the best live action representation of manga that we've seen, according to some people. But honestly, I don't know enough about manga or the comic that you read to agree or disagree, but the movie is definitely style over substance, and the film hits each beat that you would expect it to hit, and it's fairly predictable. I couldn't honestly tell you about a plot line in this movie that I genuinely cared about, and all of the supporting characters felt really thin to me and hardly fleshed out. Again, it was more about creating this stylized world that takes Pat's breath away than it is about being coherent, and that kind of stuff just doesn't do it for me in most cases. There's got to be some kind of emotional depth for me to be able to latch onto it, and that's missing in this movie. So there's a place or two at the end where it tries to capture your investment, but it's a little too late. And that bit at the end, it basically is just setting this movie up as a 2-hour trailer for the sequel. So, honestly, I feel like this is a movie that would have maybe found a fan base 30 years ago, but I think that it's going to kind of blend in going forward. I don't know that they'll ever make a sequel to this movie or not.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that was my biggest complaint with this movie, and that's why I could say, like, I couldn't disagree if you try to make the argument that this is kind of like a popcorn movie, because the visuals were stunning and they do take people's breath away, but the story not so much. And it definitely feels like they made this movie thinking that it was going to spawn this franchise, and they some of the stuff that they tease is pretty ridiculous, especially the end reveal of the kind of the main bad guy was pretty fucking stupid. I will admit that, but I think with any book or graphic novel, the adaptation, unless there's going to be several films, it definitely feels in just the way that you have to adapt these things. I mean, even with a graphic novel, you're thinking probably a good 400 pages in a decent sized graphic novel, or maybe 300 to 400 pages, something like that. And so you're shrinking that down to 2.5 at the very most. And so it definitely is always going to feel like the cliff notes of that story. And you definitely felt like you were watching the cliff notes of something bigger in this movie. And a lot of times they would introduce something and I'm like, okay, here we go. This is something I can get behind. This is something that was interesting. And then it wasn't really, that thing wasn't really explored. And it seems like what they wanted to explore, which was this love interest between these two people, which as soon as I saw Hugo, I was like, God damn it. This is going to be a love story. He is going to fuck this robot at some point. And I was very disappointed because I knew immediately that they were going to force this love story down our throat. And they definitely did. And it was a shame because I think that her backstory, like that, the war and that kind of stuff was a 1,000 times more interesting than the love story. And I think that if they explored more of that stuff, and maybe again, that's the plan if they ever did get another sequel. But from what I read, this is tracking to lose like $100 million. So there's no fucking way it's ever going to get another sequel. But it felt like they were kind of putting this together and giving us backstory in little pieces to kind of explore later. And they don't really give you the big bad until the very end of the movie, which again, that reveal was really stupid. But I would have much rather has seen a movie more about her backstory, because I thought that was really interesting. Or even the Hunter Warrior stuff I thought was pretty interesting, even though that's a really stupid fucking name for bounty hunters. Like, really super cheesy. And that kind of bugged me. But that's what they are called in the comic as well. So, by the way, which I was very interested to see when I started reading it, was what they called these bounty hunters. But they call them Hunter Warriors. So that was pretty cheesy and disappointing, but I thought that storyline was pretty interesting. I will defend it a little bit and say that if we didn't get the love story, we probably wouldn't have gotten that scene that took my breath away, the motorball scene, because that storyline leads into why she's there to begin with. So I will defend it a little bit, but it was pretty cheesy. And one of the reasons why I thought it was super cheesy is the performance by one of the actor or actresses in the love story, which I will get to when we talk about the performances. My least favorite thing was this particular person in this movie, but I'll get to that here in a little bit. But after all of that, it definitely felt like a story where they were writing it expecting to spawn a franchise, which, again, very, very unlikely that it will happen. I read a story that it was tracking to lose 200 million, but they were surprised that it made so much money this weekend. So maybe it'll be like 100 million that they'll lose. But either way, this movie is not going to make its money back.
Yeah, no shit, man. It looks really fucking expensive. I have a question though. So you made the comment, hey, this guy's going to fuck this robot, right? How does the robot shit? Because she's eating stuff. She's eating oranges. There's a lot of robots in this movie with human heads. So I'm assuming that they're all eating how they poop it out, man.
See, this is your problem, and I just discovered why you didn't like this movie as much as you probably should have. You were thinking about how the robot shits instead of getting your breath taken away. I'm leaning into it, man.
She eats that orange at the beginning of the movie, and the rest of the movie I thought about how she's going to shit that out.
I thought about the chocolate and how just disgusting it is eating just a chocolate bar. Like, I hate chocolate so much. Like, just chocolate by itself. Like, no almonds, no caramel, no nothing. Just a regular chocolate bar. That's so gross.
Yeah, that's not the problem I had with this movie, for what it's worth.
No, I know. I'm trying to change the subject, but I don't care how she shits, man.
Okay. That's fair.
But I'm pretty sure that he fucked that robot. All right. So, performances, how'd you feel about Alita?
So I think that we're going to harp on the same performance, because there's just one that stands out as being really bad, because the rest of the cast is pretty much made up of bona fide actors. So you have like Christoph Waltz, who, you know, I was mostly disappointed in with this movie because he's such a high caliber actor, and this was below him in my opinion. But then you have somebody like Jennifer Connelly who pops up that I think was fine. You have an Oscar award winner, and God, I'm always fucking up his name, Mahershala Ali, who was serviceable. But then you get to people like, what is his name? Keen Johnson, yeah. Johnson. Like, I'm assuming that's who you're talking about, because
100%.
He's not good at all.
He was the worst part of this movie for me. It was like everybody was acting in this really fun action movie, and he was acting in a Lifetime cheesy movie. He was just so over the top and so cheesy and just really, really fucking bad.
100%, man. I mean, you're right. He's the worst part of the movie for sure. The performances were definitely not a bad thing for me. I think that it's, again, a place that I was kind of indifferent. I thought Rosa Salazar was fine as Alita. And then you go through the rest of the cast, and everybody I think is pretty serviceable, but that, you know, Keen Johnson plays a pretty big role here. He's like the main supporting actor in my opinion. And it's like they pulled him from Riverdale or something, and he just doesn't bring it.
I will say that Mahershala Ali, no way.
Mahershala.
I don't think that he was that good. I think that he was kind of one note. He literally plays two characters at one point, and you can't tell the difference between the two of them. If they didn't change his eyes, I'm like, that's just the same guy. So that was a little bit disappointing.
That's because indie movies don't pay the mortgage, man. Alita Battle Angel does.
Apparently. But, I mean, I feel like he was... But he's not really developed all that well, so I don't know if it was just one of those arguments that we've had before where is it the performance versus the material, because he wasn't really given a whole lot. His character was definitely one note, so I don't necessarily blame him there. But yeah, Hugo was really fucking bad. He was just... I kept thinking, like, every time he was on the screen, because I do respect Robert Rodriguez, I'm just like, how did he just not, like, fire him day one?
Who would have thought
he was that bad to me?
I'm going through his credits right now to see like what else he's been in, and who would have thought the guy who played Colt Wheeler for 22 episodes of Nashville would have not been so great in Alita Battle Angel.
Is that like his biggest credit?
That is his, either that or Spooksville, which I've never heard of. So yeah, those are his two biggest credits after Alita.
Yeah, so maybe he just sticks to the TV shows, the TV dramas.
Yeah, I think that's where he belongs.
For sure.
All right,
so the last segment is action, which, I mean, it's pretty obvious where I stand on this movie.
Yeah, I think we've heard enough out of you around the action on this movie. Blew your fucking load. So I am not in the lost my breath camp, obviously. I just couldn't get behind this concept too much. The art direction for this movie was basically take a human's head and then go crazy with making like a Transformer's body for the human head, and then make them fight and roll around on roller skates and do crazy shit. And that just wasn't for me. I couldn't get behind it. I mean, it wasn't bad. I mean, I was just indifferent to it. And again, at no point did I gasp or lose my breath.
So, I mean, I don't feel like I need to say this, but I will, because I like to hear myself talk. But yeah, I love the action in this movie. If it wasn't as good as I think it was, then I obviously wouldn't have enjoyed this movie as much as I did. But I think that there's some films where you're lucky if you get 2 or 3 memorable scenes from it, but I could literally name you like 3 or 4 that I really enjoyed in this movie, just right off the top of my head. I will say the first motorball scene was pretty cheesy, but that also had Hugo in it, so that might have been it. But that was pretty stupid, because the game that they're playing in that scene has literally it feels like it has nothing to do with the motorball that we see later in the movie, which was disappointing, and the scene itself was pretty dumb. So that scene aside, I think every other action scene in this movie was really, really cool.
All right, I don't want to talk about this anymore. So can we put
I want to talk about it for another hour.
Can we put a rating on it, please?
Yeah, go ahead. Out of 5 stars.
2.5.
3.5.
Woof. All right.
Yeah, so again, I'm assuming you are not going to own this digitally or otherwise.
No, I will not.
Will you ever watch it again?
No, I will not.
I will own this digitally, most likely.
So not a Blu-ray pickup for you?
No, I think and again, we've talked about this before, I'm going to try to be very, very stingy. I'm almost to the point that if it didn't completely blow me away and it's not Star Wars or Marvel or something like that, I'm probably not going to own it on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but you got a high expectation, man. Movies that make you gasp and take your breath away don't deserve a spot on your Blu-ray shelf. Like, it's a pretty high bar.
Did you only follow up with that question just to get one more jab in?
No, it just kind of happened organically, and I will never forget this. This is probably top 5 moments of the podcast for me.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. More fun than I thought the review was going to be.
Exactly. I'm super glad you chose your words the way you did.
All right, man. What's nerd favorite this episode?
So I think I alluded to it at some point on the episode. I don't remember what segment, but this weekend there was a big toy fair that happens annually, and New York, where a lot of the big companies like Hasbro, Mattel, NECA, all of these companies that make different toys, especially adult collectibles, come out and show what they're going to be releasing over the next year or so. And I've been watching some of the coverage from that, and I know that you recently posted that you bought a NECA Donatello from GameStop that I think we actually talked about on the podcast as well. It's based on the 1990 movie, and that just kind of threw me into this hole where I was looking at all of the products that NECA has released and all of the licenses they have, and they make some really sweet figures, but there were some licenses that I was surprised that they don't have, given the types of toys that they make. So my question to you, knowing that you're kind of a makeshift NECA fan now, as am I, is what license would you like to see NECA get? So for those listeners out there that really aren't into this type of thing, like I mentioned, they have a license to some Ninja Turtle stuff that they're making. They're typically really huge into horror. So they make some like It and Child's Play and Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a Michael Myers figure that they just released that I got that's really cool. But that's kind of like their bread and butter. It's like sci-fi, horror, kind of obscure properties that are more adult toys as opposed to stuff you would find in the action figure aisle at a store. So with all of that explanation out of the way, there were two franchises that I was really hoping that NECA had made products for that I've been really into the last couple of weeks. The obvious one is Resident Evil. So I really wanted to get something Leon related because, again, I love that character, and I especially from Resident Evil 4, and thought that it'd be cool to have something to sit on a shelf of him. They do not have that franchise, unfortunately, right now. I think they did at one point, but they're not currently making products. However, that is not my answer. My answer is actually something that I think fits more in line with the products they do release, which is The Thing. So NECA makes a lot of different Alien and Predator figures, and I think that a really cool The Thing figure or something out of that movie would be pretty awesome to have, and it would kind of fit right up their alley with the 70s, 80s sci-fi horror vibe that they have going on with a lot of their products. So The Thing is a movie that a lot of people like. It's on my top 10. I want to say it was on your top 10 when we originally did that.
Yes, it is.
So, I mean, I think that I could speak for both of us and definitely more nerds out there that, we love that movie and I like to have some kind of memorabilia from it, even though it's going on, 40 or 50 years old at this point. So that is my pick, is The Thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've had this conversation before. I'm sure we have on the podcast, but I know we've had it off recording as well. We both got Marvel Collector in the DC boxes and the Star Wars boxes for a while, and we were both kind of into, more casually than the hardcore collectors, but we were both kind of into getting pop figures. But both of us have kind of soured on that. I've put a lot of my pop figures away. I really kind of just save getting a pop figure I like having celebrities sign them. So that's kind of my go-to thing. And so really I've gotten to the point where I only get pop figures if I have somebody to sign them. Like, I just don't collect them anymore. I do have a couple of NECA figures. As you said, I have the Donatello, which is so fucking cool. It's probably my favorite collectible that I have, really, other than the stuff that's signed, just because, of course, there's stories to those things. But I also have a Caesar from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is really cool. I was pretty excited about that. I would definitely be intrigued to go to see all the licenses they have, because they have a lot of cool toys. But my official answer is, and this is kind of a cheat, but it was the first thing that came to my mind when you first started talking about this, which is I recently watched a Facebook Live interview with the lead singer of my favorite band of all time, which is Coheed and Cambria. Claudio Sanchez was talking about, I think it was during the Q&A when somebody asked him, because they have a lot of stuff that goes along with their music, comic books and other things. If you're not aware, it's a story that he's telling through his music and through their music. And that's one of the reasons why I love them so much, because I love comic books. And one thing that they haven't really dipped their toes into, which is action figures. And NECA and them are working to get, characters from that story. They're working on the prototypes right now, so I think that would be really, really cool. So I'm definitely excited to see if that ever comes out for retail.
Awesome, man. Definitely a cool answer.
All right, so that's it for episode 228 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we love it if you would subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.